Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to another Vivacity membership webinar. Glad to see that we have so many people on board today. I think we had some problems with some people getting links, but that seems to be solved now, I hope. I hope everybody's on now. Okay. Hi, I'm getting a couple of highs. Hi. Awesome. Very interesting. I threw that poll up today to see if anybody had done their CEO stat deck, and out of 4 votes, 3 people said, 3 people said what is the CEO stat deck? So lucky you're coming to that webinar today, because we'll be going through what the CEO stat deck is today. So that's awesome. So I'll leave that poll there and just see if we get a couple more. Someone submitted. Woohoo! That's awesome. Was that you, Angie? But not you, Ben. Okay, so yes, that's interesting. So we had 1 no, still getting organised, 3 people who what is the CEO stack, and 1 person submitted, so that's awesome. Okay. So on Macs require flash update. Okay, software update. So that must be you, Richard. You must be doing an update or something. So I'm hoping it's going to be updated soon. Okay, welcome on board today, everybody. Thank you for joining me today for the Vivacity membership webinar. Today we'll be going through the standards 1.8, which is for assessment tools, and we'll be having a look at some assessment tools and things like that, and just discussing. So if you've got any questions about assessment tools, please throw it up here today, because I'd love to hear what you, any questions that you may have, and I can answer those questions today. We're also going through standard 1.9, 1.10, 11 and 12, which is about, so 1.9 to 11 is assessment validation, and anybody who is already an RTO, you should have already validated some of your assessment tools, because it's actually a requirement as an RTO to validate 50% of your assessment tools within the first 3 years and 100% over the 5 years. And that includes every unit of competency on your scope of registration. So we'll be having a look at that today. 1.12 is RPL. That one's pretty simple. And for this month only, we have 8.4, which is the CEO stat deck. So CEO stat deck is only relevant for people who are already an RTO. So Sir John, you are not already an RTO. So if you said no, what is the CEO stat deck? You're the only, you have a really good reason of why you haven't submitted your CEO stat deck yet, because you're not an RTO as yet. So it's only people who are currently an RTO who should have submitted. Okay, so I'm going to have a look at the CEO stat deck first, and then we'll get into assessment tools and things like that. And I'm just going to go through a few things about the CEO stat deck. So as per usual, this webinar forms part of your continuous improvement process under standard 2.2. Following this webinar, you should hold a Q&C meeting, and at that meeting you should minute what you learnt today, and in particular looking at the policies and procedures. What are you doing? If you are not following the policies and procedures, why are you not following the policies and procedures? It could be that your process is different, so you should update your policy and procedure, or it might mean that you need to make some adjustments within your organisation so that you are actually working within the policies and procedures required for these standards. So of course you should review the policy and procedures following this webinar and have a look at what are the policies and procedures to standard 1.8 to 1.12 and also 8.4. As per the policies and procedures for continuous improvement, if you identify that there are any gaps or opportunities for improvement from today, you should complete an opportunities for improvement form and put that into your register, and then minute it at your next monthly meeting. And you should review any documentation relating to the standards we have reviewed in today's session. So what is a CEO stat deck? So a CEO stat deck is an annual declaration of compliance. So every year, every RTO needs to submit a stat deck that states that they are compliant with the standards for RTOs 2015. So ASQA should have notified you already, although I think some of the notifications have been delayed, but all CEOs of a current RTO that's registered on training.gov.au should have received an email by now from ASQA stating that they are to complete a declaration. So it'd be interesting, out of our people who are on the poll, on the webinar today, have you received the email from ASQA regarding the stat deck? Because it would be interesting to see. Actually, I'm just going to run a poll up there. It would be interesting to see if anybody's actually received their email. Have you received the email? Okay, so I'm just going to throw that up there and you can answer that poll there. Now I know, I have always referred to this as the annual declaration, but never heard it as the CEO. It's also known as the CEO stat deck, Diana, sorry. It is the proper name is the annual declaration of compliance, but it's also known as the CEO stat deck. Waiting for the internal audit before we submit this. Okay, cool. So you got the email, but you haven't submitted yet. That's cool. That's fine. We can do that. Not a problem. And you're doing it the right way, Diana. You are getting an internal audit before you submit your CEO stat deck, which is what you should be doing. So we will be talking about that today, and having a look at whether you've received this email yet or not is one. And then the other one is have you done an internal audit? So we'll have a look at that. Some of their links didn't work. Oh, okay. So you got the email, Richard, but some of the links didn't work. It might be because it wasn't live yet. And I know ASQA have had a lot of issues with their website and all sorts of things. So I wouldn't be surprised if the link is not working. So I would just try and submit it again. Anyway, we'll go through this. So you need to ensure that your CEO's contact details are current on training.gov.au to ensure that ASQA has access to the CEO's current email address. So one of the main reasons why you would not have received the email, one, if you're not an RTO yet, you won't get this email. So firstly, if you're not registered yet, you won't get this email yet. If you are an RTO and you didn't get the email from ASQA, check your junk, because it's highly likely that it's gone to your junk box. So I'm going to have a look at this. So what if you didn't receive the email from ASQA? I'm just going to close this down. Check your spam or junk mail folder to see if it's in there, and also check that your email address for the CEO contact is correctly listed on training.gov.au. So you should look up your RTO on training.gov.au, look up the CEO details and check that the email address on there is current. And if it's not, if this address is incorrect, you need to update your contact details in ASQAnet, which is simply a simple change. I think there's a material change of event that you need to do online on ASQAnet. And then the other way is, and then email the info line at inquiries@asqa.gov.au to the advisor you have done so and request that ASQA resend the email. So if you haven't got it already. If you have previously unsubscribed for ASQA emails, or you might have put a block on your computer. So if you've unsubscribed, you will need to contact web.feedback@asqa.gov.au and ASQA can reactivate your emails, but you may have put a block, which you should never do. One thing that you should make sure that on your computer is anything that is received from asqa.gov.au should be on your safe senders list in your email account. So you should, if you haven't done this already, go into your email account and make asqa.gov.au a safe sender list, so that way you can receive emails from anybody in ASQA and it's not going to go to your junk email or, disappear off the face of the earth. So if none of the others apply, none of the above apply, you need to go to ASQA, the unhelpful line, the info line, and you can call 1300 701 801 and advise them that you did not receive the email and they'll send you the email. So you can get that. So if you haven't received the email, you should get in contact with ASQA. Check your junk email first to see if it's in there. Okay, so what is clause 8.4, or what is the CEO STEC, also known as the annual declaration of compliance? So clause 8.4 states that the RTO provides an annual declaration on compliance with the standards for RTOs. in particular whether it currently meets the requirements of the standards across all of its scope of registration and has met the requirements of the standards for all AQF certification it has issued in the last 12 months. Now, the only way that you're going to be able to verify that you are meeting the requirements of the standards is doing an internal audit. That's the only way you can actually verify that. You need an internal audit. A lot of our clients are hiring us to come out and do a systems check with their RTO. You should be doing annual systems checks anyway with your RTO, just to check that you are maintaining your compliance on an ongoing basis. And we recommend, so you can do an internal audit, you can do it yourself if you wanted to, but we recommend you get us or an external body to come in to do a systems check. And the reason why is because we're unbiased and we're not complacent with what's happening in your organisation, and we're experts at what is compliance. So you can get us in and we can do an audit just to check that you are compliant with the standards. You're also signing this stat deck to state that your training and assessment practices, strategies and practices are all in place and current. So your TASs have to be current. So you're stating that your TASs are current. So if you tick off this and say that your TASs are not current, and then you just happen to have an ASCA audit, you're going to be deemed not compliant, but also you're going to be deemed as breaking the law because the legislation states that you are signing a stat deck to say that you are compliant and that you do have current TASs in place within your organisation. Back in January, in our continuous improvement cycle, we get you to review your TASs, which is when you should have reviewed every single TAS on your scope of registration and updated them to what is currently the way you are delivering your training and assessment as per your practices. So is it up to date? So when does the form have to be submitted? So you have to submit it by midnight on the 31st of March 2017. So if you've received the email, you'll need to submit it by then. If you haven't received the email, you need to get in contact with ASQA and actually get the email. Now, eventually, it is going to be on ASQA.net. They still haven't got themselves organised yet, so it's not on ASQA.net yet. But there is, and you'll see Stat Deck will be one of the forms that you can submit through ASQA.net. I'd say they're still doing it via email because they're still getting people, reminding people that they need to do this CEO Stat Deck, but also they've had a lot of problems with ASQA.net, so they're still updating things on ASQA.net. So the annual declaration of compliance, when you submit this declaration, you are confirming with ASQA that you have systematically monitored your RTO's compliance. So by doing this webinar and reviewing your policies and procedures on a monthly basis, this is one of the things that you are doing, is systematically monitoring. This is only one component. The other one is to actually do review the policies and procedures and your documentation, not just attend the webinar, but actually do it. And then thirdly, minute it at monthly meetings, so quality and compliance meeting. And fourth is actually minuting, so minuting at your meeting, completing an opportunity for improvement form if you identify that there are any non-compliances or any weaknesses that need to be improved. So you should be doing that as well. As I said, the best way to ensure that you are compliant is to undertake an internal audit or get Vivacity to undertake a systems check of your RTO against the standards for RTOs. All non-compliances should be recorded as an opportunity for improvement and minuted at your monthly meeting. How to complete the annual declaration form. So the CEO should receive the email to your registered CEO email address as per training.gov.au. So, so I'm just going to quickly show you. I'm just going to see who I can have a look at. We'll just have a quick look. We'll do a TAFE because that's nice and easy. So I'm just going to show you on training.gov.au where the CEO information is. So I'm just going into a TAFE now. Should be thinking. I think it's thinking. Look. Okay, so here's a TAFE. So we're looking at the summary of the RTO here. Then we have the registration details, but it's the contact details here. Anybody listed under Chief Executive they're the one that's going to receive the email. So this one here is inquiries@kangan.edu.au. So is anybody listed here? So if this email address is no longer current, it's going to disappear into the never. So you need to make sure you're checking your email address is always current on training.gov.au. If it is incorrect, you need to up on, so you need to go onto ASCONet and do a material change of event, which is just showing that, just updating your contact details in there. And I'm just trying to find my slides again. I don't like it when it takes my slides away. It's like, hello. Sorry guys, I'll just get the slides back up again. Right. Okay, so you should make sure that your organisation details are always kept up to date on training.gov.au. So you'll get an email sent to you containing a unique link to an online form. The form will be available from the beginning of February until the end of March. So according to the ASCL website, you should have received it early February, but we're getting clients getting emails only last week saying that they should get an email this week. So yeah, so it's not there yet. This allows each provider 2 months to undertake the self-assessment required to complete the declaration, and you can save the online form and return to it before the end of March to submit. So if you've commenced yours, Diana, you can commence it online, but yeah, doing a internal audit is the best way, or a systems check is the best way to identify if you're non-compliant. Now, I haven't put in here yet what happens if you are non-compliant. So this would be a good example for clients who have hired us. If you are non-compliant in any areas, it's okay to tell ASCL that you are non-compliant. What you do is you say you are non-compliant with this standard, but this is the action you're taking to improve that non-compliance. You're better off saying that than saying, yes, we're compliant with everything. And then, because what they can do is use this against you to, if you are found non-compliant at an audit, they can actually use that you've signed a CEO stat deck saying that you are compliant. They can use this against you. So it's okay to say that you have had non-compliances and that you are taking action to rectify those. So what happens if you don't complete the annual declaration? So this clause for 8.4 outlines what the requirements are, but if you do not submit the requested declaration, ASCL has the right to take further regulatory action. Now, because this is legislation and it's an act within legislation, they can actually fine you. I haven't seen very many RTOs where this has happened, but the worst case scenario is they can actually cancel your registration and shut you down. And we don't want that sort of thing happening just because you've forgotten to put in your annual stat deck. So it puts your RTO at risk of non-compliance and possible cancellation of registration. So you must submit it. So submit it. Don't go along and go, yes, we're compliant, particularly if you don't know. So I've actually heard an ASCL auditor say that they will use those stats against you, in particular if they come back out and do an audit and you said you're compliant, and particularly if you're very non-compliant. Now, the evidence that they'll use to check that you are monitoring and checking your compliance is that you've had internal auditing done. So they'll look at your internal audit reports. They'll also look at evidence of you holding your monthly meetings and where you have recorded that you are reviewing a couple of standards each month. This webinar, you can get, you'll get a certificate from us stating that you attended this webinar, and this goes towards your professional development. And this webinar includes that we are reviewing a couple of standards each month. So, so other evidence you can show is if you identify any opportunities for improvement from attending this webinar, that's the evidence that you've got there, that you are monitoring your compliance. Okay, so that's the CEO stat deck. So if you have any questions about the CEO stat deck, please let me know. Just throw it up in the chat box there, because now we're going to jump into standard 1.8, which is assessment tool. So, standard 1.8, the RTO implements an assessment system that ensures that assessment, including recognition of prior learning, complies with the assessment requirements of the relevant training package or VET accredited course, and is conducted in accordance with the principles of assessment and rules of evidence. Now, I go through this in my workshop. If you've been to my workshop on RTO compliance and assessment validation, the second day on assessment validation, we go in deep about the rules of evidence and principles of assessment. It's really very much, you get the unit of competency and you layer on top of that the principal assessment rules of evidence, and it's quite complex. It actually takes me a whole day to explain this whole process to people. So we're going to try and do it quickly today in this webinar. The top non-compliances at audit is assessment tools. So this is ASQA stating this, not us. It's also our experience as well when we go to audit, that generally the assessment tools are going to be the most non-compliant at audit. And it's mainly because the tools did not address the performance criteria or the assessment requirements as per training.gov.au. So if you look up a unit of competency on training.gov.au, you'll see that it's got the performance criteria, assessment conditions. This is where most of the non-compliances are. The other one is that the tools haven't been contextualised to the learner cohort, so the target audience that you have within your organisation, so the typical students that you recruit into your RTO. In particular, if you have low language and literacy students, you need to adapt your training and assessment tools to meet the low language literacy or English as a second language or students with a disability. So there's a range of ways that you should adapt your assessment tools. That the tools haven't been validated to actually check whether they are compliant with the standards, compliant with the unit of competency requirements, the performance criteria and the assessment conditions. So the only way you're going to work out whether your assessment tools are compliant is by validating your assessment tools. So that's going to lead us into 1.9, 10, 11. The RTO doesn't have a mapping tool, so they're unable to show the auditor where the tool addresses the performance criteria and the assessment conditions. Now, it's not a requirement, it's not a compliance requirement to have a mapping tool, assessment mapping tool in place, but it does make your validation much easier, and it also makes the audit process much easier when your auditor comes in. So assessment tools all assessment tools must meet the requirements of the training package. So this includes the performance criteria within each unit of competency and the assessment requirements within each unit of competency. And you can also check the companion guide provided by the SSO, so Skill Services Organisations. And you should also look at the foundation skills. Now, what I thought I would do is jump in and have a look at a qual, and of course I've picked a TAFE that has like a zillion qualifications on it. All right, we'll go to business qual. So what I'm going to do is just take you back to TGA, training.gov.au, and we're just going to have a look at a business qualification. So I've just searched a business qualification, so BSB 50215, yep. So in here, you can see the qualification, you can see the companion guide. So there's a companion guide here for this qualification. You can also have a look at the qualification outline, which is in here. So it tells you what the entry requirements, what the units are, core and electives and things like that. Now, if you click into a unit, you'll have a look at the unit. You can see the companion guide once again for that unit of competency. So you can click on that link and it will take you to the companion guide for business services. So that's in particular for that one. So you should have a look at the companion guide when you're validating your assessment tools. And also in the companion guide, a lot of them have information on how to write your training assessment strategy and what should be, it's where we get information from for updating training assessment strategy. So what I'm talking about when I talk about the unit of competency and the assessment conditions is these bits here. So you should have a look in here and you should look at your assessment tools to make sure that they actually meet the requirements of the performance criteria. So you're validating them against this and you're looking at the assessment conditions. So what are the performance evidence, knowledge evidence and assessment conditions for that unit of competency. Some of the units will actually have what resources must you have in place to deliver the assessments for a unit. This one's a soft skills based unit, so there's no equipment required here, but there is performance evidence and things like that. And some of them under the performance evidence will be quite descriptive on how your assessments should be delivered. So it'd actually go into, be interesting to see, I might do a first aid unit because that one is a bit more descriptive on what you need to have for resources and assessment tools and things like that. So I can go into here, looking at the unit of competency, looking at the assessment requirements, in particular the assessment requirements. So you'll see in here, they've got performance evidence, and it actually says what, like, you've got to perform CPR at least for 2 minutes. It's quite descriptive what you have to do. You have to have assessments that includes allergic reaction, anaphylaxis, bleeding control, shock. You've got to have knowledge evidence. These are generally written questions or true or false questions that you'd have there. And then this one has assessment conditions, so how you must assess assess it, and then see how here it's got the resources. So it actually stipulates what resources you must have. You must have this in place, or have access to it at least. So all your students must have access to all of that equipment. So it's quite descriptive. So when you are validating, you should be validating against these units of competencies and the assessment conditions within the unit of competencies. So you should be looking at the performance criteria. Does your assessment tool include that you are collecting sufficient evidence against this performance criteria? So 1.1, recognise an emergency situation is one example. So you go into the portfolio and you identify, does your assessment tool include any where you're collecting sufficient evidence to deem a student competent that they can perform this skill? And that's basically what assessment validation is, and that's what's going to happen at audit, is they'll check that, and then on top of that, they're going to check that you actually have assessment tools in place that will allow you to collect sufficient evidence that you demonstrates that the student knows how to do these things. And then the other thing that should be in your assessment tools, you can have mapping tools. So your mapping tools can map against these as well. You don't have to have a mapping tool, but as I said before, it makes it much easier. And I had something else on my mind, but I've lost it now. But yeah, so when you're validating, you should validate against these. All right, I'll go back to my PowerPoint. Okay, so that I'm going in deep into assessment validation because that's coming up next. And when you come to the assessment validation workshop, I go into that into quite some detail. That's where I was going to go. So where you've got the performance criteria and the assessment conditions, on top of that, you should be layering principles of assessment and rules of evidence. So you should include so when you're validating, you're looking at the rules of evidence, and you're looking at the assessment conditions and the performance criteria, but over that, is it valid? Is it relevant? Is it authentic? Is it current, reliable? That's all the sort of information that we should be layering over the top when you're doing assessment validation. Okay, so that's assessment tools. We highly recommend that you purchase your assessment tools the first time around, and the main reason why is why reinvent the wheel when we can just improve it. So I recommend that you purchase assessment tools and then develop from there, and that's called contextualization. So you contextualize the assessment tool. But what you've got to always remember is just because you purchase assessment tools doesn't mean that they're compliant. There are good and bad publishers out there of assessment tools, just as there are good and bad RTOs and good and bad consultants. So we recommend that you go through. The way you can check whether your assessment tools are valid and actually going to be current and compliant is do assessment validation, conduct some assessment validation. So that would be pre-assessment validation that you would be doing. So you need to make sure that they address the requirements of the unit of competency, have been developed by reputable organisations. So we recommend a few publishers. What our client liaison officers recommend to you is generally based on our experience when we go to audit and what we've seen. We haven't seen a lot, like all assessment tools that are available out there, but we've got a few that we have worked with in the past. So on our website, you'll actually see we've got useful links. And under useful links, we have training resources. So you can actually go to our website and you can see we've got the training packages in here that they address. And these are companies that we've worked with in the past. We have their website. Some of them have a Facebook page with phone numbers, and you can email them through there as well. So we recommend that you jump on here and check out all the resources, different types of resources that we have there. That you could possibly use, but also listen to your client liaison officer, because they'll provide you advice on the best tools to use based on our experience at audit. So and that's the best way. But sometimes we get some pretty tricky units of competency that we haven't used before, so we have to trial, some new ones. But really good online platforms that I like is Canvas is quite good. Canvas is an online platform where you have to plug in your assessment tools, but it has really good realistic online learning where the trainer can actually interact with the student, and it's quite a good platform for delivery of online learning, which is basically where the future of training is going to be going. So I'll see if yeah, I think that was there. We'll have a look at that before I leave today. I'll have a look at some of these websites. So another one is Didasco. Didasco is quite a good one, and that one's a platform, online learning platform that also includes assessment tools. So there's some good ones there. So you need to make sure that the assessment tools that you have in place are suitable for your target audience, which means do they meet their existing skills and knowledge? So you should really identify what are the existing skills and knowledge of your students and how are you going to address their needs when you're in your delivery of training. Are they suitable for the learner cohort's language, literacy and numeracy requirements? So have you got it actually to the level of the student requirements? Will students be required to access the internet to complete assessments? And if yes, do they have access? How do they get access to the internet? Are you going to provide them with some sort of means to do it? The best way is actually just to tell them to go to a library and recommend that if you, or have a computer lab at your training organisation. So I've already been there, so that's useful links on our website, so you can check out that. So what should you purchase? You should purchase a textbook or a learner guide to assessment and an assessor guide to assessment, but you should have some textbooks or some training materials. Now, we've been using a company called Accredited Education and Training. They're quite good. They're good assessment tools, but they don't provide textbooks or training guides. They mainly provide assessment tools. So you can use things like Cengage or McGraw-Hill for the textbooks and then use them for the assessment tools. And it's not a bad way of doing it. They're not going to map exactly, but what they will do is provide you with training materials that you can use, and there's normally video links and things like that that you can use as well, and then you'll have the assessment tool, which is where you would conduct the assessment. Now, what I don't recommend is to have 2 lots of assessments at your audit, or it can get a bit confusing for students if they have one textbook with assessments at the end and then you're giving out other assessments. It makes it a bit difficult for the student to understand what they're supposed to be doing unless you remove the assessments at the end. So I don't mind. Accredited Education and Training are pretty good. They just don't provide the training guides or learning guides as well. What I have recommended that they need to do is they should recommend some textbooks where you can buy textbooks or what would match with what you're doing. Is the learner guides to assessment a separate document? We normally have this at the back of the learner guide. Yeah, you can have the learner guide to assessment at the back of the book. That's not a problem. You can have it as a separate document. The main difference between the learner's guide to assessment and the assessor's guide to assessment is the assessor's guide has the answers. That's basically the difference. So it's the same assessment tools, but you have the answers to the questions in the assessor's guide. Also, the difference is in the learner guide, it's instructions to the student on how the assessment is going to be conducted, whereas in the assessor guide, it's a guide to the assessor on how the RTO wishes the assessment to be conducted. So we have consistency of assessment. Angie's jumped in and she said that the AET learner guides for first aid have, so first aid has learner guides as well as assessment tools for first aid. So yeah, so they're quite good that way. But yeah, you should have learner guide to assessment, assessor guide to assessment. An assessment mapping tool is ideal. Like a good publisher will have assessment mapping tool. Textbooks or learner books, textbooks, guides, or things like that. So what you're going to be delivering the training with is the books that you should be giving out, or handouts. You could have handouts as well. You don't have to have textbooks. So training resources, so you should include all your training resources as per, like where you looked at that unit of competency, as per what's in the outline for the unit of competency. So you should have those in place, so physical resources, and you should have PowerPoint presentations as well. Not all publishers will have PowerPoint presentations included in their packages. that can be a bit more expensive. But basically, a good trainer should be able to write PowerPoints based on the assessment tools or the textbooks that they have. That's what I do. So you should register, and all your trainers should register on training.gov.au to get notifications for your RTO and the qualifications that they are delivering and assessing, so you get updates of anything that changes within the training package, because if there are any changes, that's going to affect your assessment tools. And it means that your assessment tools will need to be validated against the new performance criteria and the assessment conditions of the unit of competency if there has been change. And generally, training.gov.au will include a notification of what are the changes and if it's a significant change or whatever, if there's a direct equivalent. And that will guide you on what you need to validate on your assessment tools. Okay, so I've already covered a bit of assessment validation with the assessment, because basically the only way you're going to check that your assessment tools are compliant is by validating your assessment tools. So Standard Book 1.9, 10 and 11 is all about assessment validation. You've got to have a plan in place for ongoing systematic validation. We have the assessment validation schedule, which includes when you're going to validate each unit of competency over a I think we might do a 3-year period, but it's over a 5-year period. And that judgment includes for each training product and the RTO scope of registration. So when assessment validation will occur, what products will be at the focus of the validation, who will lead and participate in validation activities, and how the outcomes of these activities will be documented and acted upon. As I stated earlier, 50% of your assessment tools need to be validated within the first 3 years, and you need to take into account the relative risks of each unit of competency on your scope of registration. So a higher risk unit of competency is anything to do with where there could be student could possibly cause harm to an individual who is elderly or children, basically. So aged care and disabilities and anything where they're working with high risk equipment where they could run over someone. So a high risk unit on your scope of registration would be something where it could affect the public. A low risk unit of competency on your scope would be something that's more soft skills, it's more, might be communication skills, it might be computer skills and things like that. Things where you're using equipment like truck driving and things like that, that's going to be a high risk unit of competency. And you need to have 100% of your units validated over a 5-year period. So for the purpose of validation, the RTO's assessment practices and judgments must be undertaken by someone. So the validation team should include someone, it can be the same person or it can be a panel, but it's someone who holds the qualification that you are validating, holds TAE, and wasn't involved in the conduct of the assessment. So you can have the assessor join the assessment validation team who marks the assessments, but they can't sign off on the validation. So they can be part of the assessment validation team. And I think I have a chart for this. How to ensure the tools are compliant? The best way to ascertain that your assessment tools is compliant is to conduct assessment validation against the performance criteria, assessment conditions, rules of evidence and principal assessment. Rules of evidence is basically looking at the validity of the assessment and the process of how you are conducting the assessment is sound, and it claims the assessment reflects the actual requirements of the benchmark within the performance criteria. Sufficiency is that we're collecting sufficient evidence to deem a student competent. So it's how much evidence. So sufficiency isn't 2 or 3 forms of evidence that we're collecting. It is sufficient evidence to deem the student competent. So you should have sufficient evidence in place that anybody could pick it up and go, yep, we've got sufficient evidence here to deem a student competent. Sufficiency also comes under the amount of equipment that you have in place, trainers and assessors that you have within your organisation against what your projected forecasted profit and loss is. So if you've said you're going to be delivering 100 courses in something and you're going to be having overlaps and things like that, do you have enough trainers and assessors to actually conduct that? So you should have sufficient trainers and assessors. Authenticity, how do we ensure that it's actually the student's own work? Currency, so we've got current evidence, so it's within should be magic. The invisible ink for this is 3 years of evidence within the last 3 years. So, and currency within the last 3 years. So if they worked, so if you're doing RPL, for example, and if they worked in the industry over 10 years ago, that's not going to be current. The evidence we're collecting needs to be current as well. So this is in particular for portfolio of evidence when you're doing RPL, but it's also relevant for when you are collecting evidence over a period of time for assessments, when you're collecting assessments. Principal assessment is it fair, valid, flexible, reliable? Are we being fair on the student? Are we conducting assessments flexibly to meet the student learner cohort needs? It could be that they're work-based students, so are we making the assessments flexible enough to fit in with their workplace? That's an example. Is the evidence that we're collecting reliable? Do we have consistency with our assessor's marker guide, where we have consistent answers on the marking guide for the assessors to use? So that's an example of reliable evidence that we're collecting. And is it valid? Validity is defined as the extent to which the instrument measures that it states to measure and must address the entire unit of competency. So that's basically the principles of assessment. As I stated earlier, we can go into that in much more detail if and when you come to the assessment validation workshop. And in that workshop, we actually cover off a lot of this information here. So your assessment validation schedule is a plan on when you plan to validate your assessment tools. And this includes a policy and procedure for assessment validation. So we have a schedule. You can see the example here. We include the unit of competency over here. When are we scheduling it to be validated? Who's going to lead the validation team? And then when you actually conducted it, so that you should complete this when you've actually conducted it. So it must include the unit of competencies, the assessment tools for each unit, who led the validation team, the dates of actual pre and post assessment validation, that you conducted 50%, validated 50% of your assessment tools within the first 3 years and 100% over a 5-year period. So you should hold an assessment validation meeting. We recommend that you do this twice a year. There's enough workload in the year for you to be, you don't need to be doing it on a monthly basis or anything like that. Generally January and June or July, mid-year we recommend, but you work it out in your schedule, what suits you. Choose the slower times of the year for you to validate. You're going to need at least 2 hours for the first assessment tool and then an hour for every tool after that. So you can generally do 3 or 4 in a half day, and you could do about 8 in a full day, 7 or 8 in a full day, and that's what we recommend. But it depends on the size of the assessment tools and what's included in that assessment tools and how many things you have to validate within that assessment tool. So tools required for assessment validation is any tools that you are using for a unit of competency. So it could be a written, oral, demonstration, third-party, RPL kits, work placement tools, all of that, everything that goes with that unit of competency. The training product outline from training.gov.au or the accredited course owner, so those units that we just looked at online, so you grab those from TGA. We should be looking at the process of assessment and including the instructions to the student and the assessor. Are they clear? Are they transparent? Is it easy for the trainer and student to follow? Is it ambiguous or is it easy enough to follow for anybody to read it? It should be that any assessor should be pick up any assessment tool from, it doesn't matter what qualification, and they should be able to follow the instructions for assessment. So it should be really clear. And you should have your assessment mapping tool as well. Not always provided, not a compliance requirement, but it does make life much, much easier. You should complete an assessment validation report following completion of the assessment validation, and that includes when conducting the assessment validation, you should complete the report. Once the report is completed, if there are any opportunities for improvement identified, they should be written in here, recommendations, and then you should include that on your minutes of your Q&C meeting and complete it in the opportunities for improvement register, and acted upon and improve your tools. So, this is who should be in your assessment validation team. So the team that collectively holds relevant vocational competencies and current industry skills, current knowledge and skills in VET teaching and learning, so they've actually got some experience in teaching and learning. They hold the Cert 4 in training assessment. So these could include trainers and assessors from your RTO, from another RTO, the RTO manager or other senior management. You can have industry experts. We've recommended that you can bring clients in or businesses that you're working with to be your industry experts when you're conducting assessment validation. I had a really good example. I did a workshop in Sydney last week. We had a really good example of a client who says he works with a mining company and he meets with the HR manager from the mining company once a fortnight, and they do industry engagement on a regular basis, and they're adjusting their training to meet their student needs. And I said, brilliant, bring them in and do assessment validation with them. Would they get involved? And he said, yeah, for sure, they would get involved. And I said, well, there's your industry expertise, and they can come in, and I tell you what, they'll be really honest about what type of assessments they need these students to have and what type of skills and knowledge they should have before they go into the workplace. So any consultants who have expertise in assessment validation, you can get them involved. We can do assessment validation with you. We can lead a validation team with you if you would like that. It's like getting training and getting validation at the same time. But we also are independent of your organisation, so we can give an unbiased and a view of your assessment tools, and also an experience view as well, and staff from other RTOs. So the facilitator, I recommend that the facilitator of your assessment validation team at least holds a Cert 4 in training and assessment. They should have some industry experience, but they don't necessarily. It's mainly the facilitator is the person who keeps the meeting going. And it's normally good if they're external and aren't part of the RTO. So it gives them, providing guidelines, it's really good to get your assessors attending assessment validation as well. It's a facilitator's responsibility to keep the meeting in line and also sign off the assessment validation report at the end of the validation. Oh, this is where I was talking about who can validate who. So an assessor cannot sign off on assessment validation of assessments they've conducted themselves. So you have to get different assessors to validate other assessors' assessment tools. So they can't validate their own assessment tools. And that's because they'd have a biased view on what is compliant or not, and the way that they've conducted their assessments, yeah. Okay, so we're on to RPL, standard 1.12, the RTO, basically that you just offer RPL. This is basically what this is. But you should have strategies in place for conducting RPL. Some assessment tool providers, publishers, will provide RPL tools included with their assessment tools. Some organisations will just get students to complete the assessments, not attend the training, just complete the assessments in the assessment books. But we've also got an RPL kit that you can use where it collects a portfolio of evidence of the student's skills and knowledge against the performance criteria and the assessment conditions within the unit of competency. So you can use this RPL kit for collecting evidence of students' competency within a unit. All RTOs must offer RPL on their marketing materials. They've made that a requirement of the standards. You've got to have that included. So evidence for RPL includes, you can have certificates or qualifications that they've achieved from other providers. You can also have a look at some performance or demonstration of their skills, any workplace observations or any reports or documentation they've produced in the workplace. They could conduct an oral presentation, collect a portfolio of evidence, have a written presentation. You could do interviews with employers and bosses and things like that. You can have video evidence and things like that as well. So there's a range of different ways you can collect RPL. Right, I did well, got 5 minutes to spare. Woohoo! I feel like I've gone like Speedy Gonzales today and gone through that really quickly because I had a lot of information to get through. So you'll get a copy of the recording of this webinar today. So if you feel that you need to watch it again because maybe you didn't get everything, you're most welcome to watch the webinar again on video. Please share it with the rest of your team as well. This is part of your professional development and maintaining your currency within the VET sector. The next webinar is on the 3rd of April 2017, and we'll be going through standards 1.3 to 120, which is all about your trainer assessors' skills and qualifications and keeping them up to date with their professional development and TAE requirements. So that's what's going to be in the next webinar. I didn't have very many questions. See if anybody's got any questions for me before we sign off today. Hope you got a lot out of today. Thank you, Diana. Thank you, Serkan. Sajan, thank you for attending today. Thank you, Richard, for attending today. It was great to catch up with you all again. And thank you for attending today's session. See you soon. Yes, I'm going to see you next week, Diana. I heard about Amanda's, looks like she's going to be popping out a baby soon. So I'm going to come out and do your audit next week. So, yeah, so not a problem. Okay, that's all right, Karen. So, Karen, you'll have a copy of the recording of this webinar so you can watch it later. So you can certainly watch it yourself, and other people can watch the webinar as well. I am better live, and it's good if you ask me questions. So I love having you guys online live so that I can chat with you guys and answer all those questions that you may have. Thank you for attending today, and I look forward to catching up with you again soon. And I'll see you next week, Diana, at your systems check. Okay, bye.